Hello, it's Richard at Track Trail. Today I'm going to take 4 of our devices on around a 10 or 11 mile walk, which is going to be around the Telford area, but going into a little bit more rural areas and up and around a big hill called the Wrekin, which is in the area. So the 4 devices I'm taking, I'll show those to you now. They are these here, so hopefully what you can see is the spot tracker. We have got an LTE, we have a Zoleo, and we have the Garmin inReach Mini 2. So those 4 devices all operate slightly different way. 3 of them are satellite transmitting devices. The Spot sends to a constellation of 24 satellites. The inReach and the Zoleo send to a constellation of 66 satellites. And the LTE device, whilst it triangulates from satellite, it sends its data back via all 4 of the mobile networks. So we're going to see how those perform. We've got very mixed terrain today, a little bit open, quite a little bit under the trees, and that's where I expect the satellite devices, potentially the Spot more so than the others, may not transmit live. So we're going to have a look at that today and see how they all perform, and we'll give some updates as we go. All right, we'll speak to you soon. Okay, so those 4 devices that I have just introduced, this is the route that we're going to be taking those on. So there are 4 devices here. Let me just scroll through them in turn. First of all, let's click on the Zoleo. The Zoleo is going to be a green color device. And then if I go and choose the inReach Mini, the inReach Mini is a little blue colored device. Next up is the Spot, which is going to be orange. And finally is the LTE, which is going to be a purple colored device. Now, throughout the walk today, I will take periodic screenshots from my mobile phone live where I am at various points in time, just to illustrate where all the trackers are showing their current location in relation to where I am. So let's first of all take a quick discussion about the route today. So the route that we're taking starts here just by the M54 in Telford, and it heads across some open area until we get to around this point here where we enter some woods. It skirts around back into a little bit of open area, and then you reach a farm at this point in time, and it essentially is woodland all the way around up into here. There's a little bit of open track, but more or less you are still in woods. There is a little bit of open track above you as you head down a road, but again, this is largely a wooded area, and then you're at the foot of the hill called the Wrekin, which is this 407-meter hill. There's a winding track up amongst the trees, and when you get to around about this point, you emerge from the trees. It's a very wide track and there's open sky. There's open sky right the way up to the top, and that open sky disappears around about this point here, as is illustrated by the tree icons. And you descend quite sharply right the way down and wind your way back around alongside the trees. And then we're going to make our way across and up another steep little climb under the forest, under the trees again, called the Urkel, and then down, skirting around a golf course, heading back through some woods, and then ultimately making our way back through some open ground all the way back to our start location. So it's going to be interesting to see how they perform. I'll discuss a little bit more about it on the route, but essentially the LTE device I expect to perform very well throughout. The satellite devices could prove to have some patchy performance because of the tree cover, and it will be certainly quite interesting to see how the different devices perform, the Spot tracker versus the Zoleo versus the inReach, which are the satellite devices, and they may perform not quite as well as the LTE under the trees. But let's go out on our walk now and see how it actually pans out. Okay. I'm about a mile into our walk today, carrying the 4 devices, the LTE tracker, the Zoleo, the Spot, and the Garmin inReach Mini 2. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about positioning of these devices. So today I've got them in probably what would be best described as the manufacturer's intent for them in terms of how they are hung or mounted on my pack here. So 3 of the devices have a carabiner. which you would think by design means they can just be clipped onto the back of the backpack and swung at any angle, and that is exactly what I've done with them. So they're all just sitting there. Not sure I can show. Let's have a quick look, see if you can see. Not sure how successful that was, but hopefully you'll see that 3 of the devices were swinging on their little carabiners, and the LTE tracker, which doesn't have a carabiner, has been stored in the top pouch of the rucksack. Now then, in my experience, that is not necessarily the optimal way to mount them. We find that putting them onto the shoulder, ideally with the top of the device facing the sky, when we're talking about a spot tracker specifically, is the best way for them to operate. Because that way, when they're facing upwards, the receiver, which is usually on the top of the device for a spot at least, is going to receive signal from a large patch of the sky. Whereas if you were to point it backwards or sideways, as it is right now, just swinging off the back of the pack, then there is a limited patch of sky because it's facing backwards. So I don't think I'd necessarily agree with the way the manufacturer designed the mounting for these devices, and I would always advocate putting them on the shoulder. But for today's test, we are going to use them out of the box, so to speak, and using the carabiners and the facilities that the manufacturer has provided to see how they operate. Now we've just entered a wooded area here. It's fairly light wood, and I would now expect the devices which transmit to satellite potentially to not update as often as they have been. So just as an indicator, the Spot device transmits once every 5 minutes. The Zoleo transmits once every 6 minutes. The Garmin inReach transmits once every 10 minutes. And the LTE device, that can be set for any update interval, but today I've set it to update once every 30 seconds, which would give it around 2 days battery life. We can make it update once every 2 minutes, which would make it work for around about 5 to 6 days, and you can push it out as fast as 5 or 10 seconds, but the battery then would expire within 24 hours. And so 30 seconds to 1 minute is a more reasonable interval. Now you might ask, why does mounting position and frequency of updates matter? Well, on the LTE devices, because those devices triangulate position from a satellite but transmit it back using every available mobile network on various bands, including IoT, Cat-M1, which are 4G bands, as well as falling back to 2G if necessary. It doesn't matter so much. Those devices can still transmit within a bag, because much like a mobile phone, your phone operates when it's in your pocket and when it's in the top of your bag, and therefore positioning isn't so important. However, when we're talking about the satellite transmitting devices, the more layers of material, even if that might be a thin material, you're putting in top of it, you're going to affect its transmission and receiving capabilities, even if it's just a little bit. But more so than that, the minute you put it inside a bag, you are then encouraging potentially other items to gather around it. So therefore you're going to potentially have, I don't know, it could be anything inside your bag, which might go in top of the receiver and prevent it from transmitting very well. So that's why we'd always advocate putting them on top or the outside of the bag to ensure that they're best positioned. Now, the way the transmit differs, the LTE, assuming it's got a mobile signal of any network in the world, it will transmit once every 30 seconds, 2 minutes, or whatever it may be set to. But if it roams into an area where there's zero mobile signal on any network, it does something which the other devices do not do, and that is it will buffer the recorded data points on the device itself and then retransmit them all later once it gets back into an area of mobile signal. So that means that you never lose the breadcrumb trail. The breadcrumb trail is always preserved, retransmitted later, and that means if you were doing something like a route where you needed to record your data for a record, like a fastest known time, or even just a DOV where you want to review the route later and show it to the children or the people taking part in your expedition, say this is where you went and this is where you were supposed to go, then preserving that breadcrumb trail is very useful. Now then, if you look at the satellite transmitting devices, they don't do that. If they are unable to transmit a piece of data to the satellite, they simply forget that data point. And then the next time they are scheduled to transmit, which might be 5 or 10 minutes later, they will try again and just retransmit that data, just transmit that data point where they are at that point in time. And you will not get where they were. So as a result, when you're reviewing the routes from satellite devices like Spots, inReaches, Zoleos, if they were unable to transmit, you will have lost all that granularity simply because, I think for the sake of cost and the expensive satellite data network subscriptions, the manufacturers choose not to buffer data and only transmit what they can transmit live and nothing else. And for me, that presents a little bit of a problem, but it depends on your use case, really. If your main interest is transmitting live and not worrying too much about buffered data, and you're in an area that's got no mobile signal, then one of those LTE, so one of the Spot devices or inReach devices or Zoleos may be what you need. But if you need to preserve your track, as well as for the most part get an accurate signal, then the LTEs tend to outperform all of those other devices. Now talking about the way the satellite transmitting devices transmit, which is Zoleo, inReach and the Spot. The Spot, first of all, transmits to a private constellation of satellites called the Global Star constellation, and there are 24 satellites covering the globe, and it covers most of the globe but not all. The devices, the Spot trackers don't work at the poles, or very well at the poles, or at all in some circumstances. Around the equator, oceans and various other parts of the world, there are gaps in its coverage, so it isn't a true 100% global coverage device. But for use in the UK, generally speaking, it's fine. But because there are only 24 satellites, and the device only transmits on a schedule once every 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it's set to, you tend to find that if you're in an area, certainly with trees, obviously it won't transmit, it needs to see the sky, that's a given. But if you're in an area that's got steep terrain, then you may be in an area that there's not much of a patch of sky visible. Let's say you've got 2 steep hills either side of you, there's a very small patch of sky above you, and the satellite has to be passing in line of sight at the exact time that the tracker transmits in order for the data to get through. And because that patch of sky is so small, the chances of a satellite being in there at exactly the 5-minute window is greatly reduced. The same, of course, applies to the Iridium devices, which is the Zoleo and the inReach. So those devices also transmit direct to satellite, but they transmit to the Iridium constellation. So the Iridium constellation of satellites, there are 24 satellites, well, sorry, there are not 24, there are 66 satellites in low Earth orbit, with a few extra in spare as well that can be moved into the constellation in the event of an issue. Now that means there are almost 3 times more trackers for those devices to communicate with, which makes their performance a lot more reliable. That's reflected in the cost of the devices. They're more expensive than Spots, and also the cost of the subscriptions, which are typically 1.5 times more expensive per month than the Spot is. The Spot is circa £20 a month, and this is on a monthly contract, and the inReach is around £35. The Zoleo is £22.50, so it's in between the two, only a little bit more expensive than the Spot, but it doesn't quite have all the capabilities that the Spot has in terms of extra buttons on there. So what do we conclude from that? Are satellite transmitting devices the silver bullet? Because they work everywhere, even where there's no mobile signal. And much as I'd like to say yes, and I really do like Iridium devices, especially the inReach Mini 2, the answer is they're not the silver bullet you might think for those reasons. They don't transmit onto trees, and they don't transmit well near steep terrain. And if, of course, there's no satellite passing as they try to transmit, they forget that data point. So for that reason, their use cases are very specific. You have to be spending extensive time in an area where there's no mobile cover. So if you're going to walk the Cape Wrath Trail, you're going to go over the Cairngorms, or you're spending days in the lowest valleys of bits of Snowdonia and bits of Brecon, and you're not going up any of the hills, then those satellite transmitting devices will work better than any other device, especially the Iridium devices. However, if you are in areas where there's even a little bit of mobile signal, then the LTE will outperform all of the satellite transmitting devices every day of the week. They transmit more reliably, faster, and they cost a lot less to operate as well. So we have all of these devices in stock for hire and sale. We don't have any preference as to which is better. As I've just said, there is no it's better. As always, the answer is it depends. So always come to us for some advice on where most often you'll be using your trackers, and we can tell you which one is better to use. If you're purchasing a device and most often you're going in typical areas like the Peak Districts and Dartmoor and places like that, then the LTE is going to work best. Occasionally, if you're going out to somewhere very remote like Highlands of Scotland or places like that, you can hire an inReach or hire a spot tracker or hire a Zoleo just for that individual trip, because the cost of operating those devices on subscriptions, the satellite transmitting devices, is quite substantial. So you've got to be using them very regularly in order to get the most out of them. So in terms of bang for buck, the LTE devices are without doubt the best value for money, but because their limitation is they need a little bit of mobile signal on some network, there are places where they're not going to transmit live, as we've just discussed. So choose your device carefully, and we're more than happy to advise you on which device is going to be best for your particular expedition, route or use case. I hope that helps. So I've just come to the top of the first little climb and past our first checkpoint, Steerway Farm, and I'll snap you this screenshot. And what you can see from the screenshot from the 4 devices shown is that the purple one is the LTE device. That device is showing its location exactly where we are right now. It's transmitting every 30 seconds, and it's transmitted every 30 seconds and followed a true breadcrumb trail. All of those other devices, you can see, have not. They've stopped a half a mile or so back. As soon as we entered the wooded area, they've all stopped transmitting. So that illustrates the point I've discussed earlier on, in that as soon as you enter areas of tree cover, those devices become less reliable to the point of not working at all in some cases. We'll see how it progresses along the rest of the route. Right, I'm now on top of the Wrekin, which is about 4 or so miles into the route. And if you look at the screenshot now, you'll see now we're back in the open. All the trackers have more or less caught up. There's a little bit of lag between them. That's just down to the different frequencies in which they update. The LTE is always going to be ahead of everybody else's. The Zoleo is at the back there, but hopefully that'll catch up in a couple of minutes once it sends its next data transmission point. And yeah, we'll continue on. So as expected, in the trees, the satellite devices have dropped out. When you get back into the open, they pick back up again. We're now going to continue down off the top of the Wrekin, which is fairly open ground. You can see back down there, all open, and at the top there is just the summit. And we're going to continue down into the open ground, and then it dips back into the trees. As we head down, we're going to go down the kind of side and the bottom of the hill, which is back under tree cover, so we may get some drop off, and we may even drop out a signal for the LTE, so it'll be interesting to see that comparison there as well. Okay, I'm now at the bottom of the Wrekin and just started to walk down along the bottom side around all the trees here that you can see. So it's actually not very dense woods, it's fairly light. You see plenty of sky above. but doubtless, as you'll see from the screenshot, the satellite devices are still struggling a little bit. The spot tracker is actually still stuck almost on the top of the Wrekin, where there was plenty of sky, and since we've entered the trees, it hasn't sent an update probably for about 15 minutes or so. The other two devices have sent more recent updates. That's the inReach and the Zoleo, and they are on the Iridium constellation, and that's what I would expect. There are more satellites for them to speak to, so even though we're under trees, there's a better chance that they're able to send some data through. So that's where we're now down off the Wrekin, and we're about to go up the hill at the Urkel. Now it's almost an hour since the spot tracker has sent any data. Now we've been in woods for all of that time, have emerged onto a road now, but there is a bit of sky, so I'm hoping spot tracker might send a ping, but I'm going back into woods very shortly, so we may not get any more data. The other two trackers, the Zoleo and the inReach, both on the Iridium, they have more or less caught up with where we are now. Okay, as you'll see from the screenshot, the spot tracker did pick up. It was just over an hour after it sent its previous point. When we were on the road, it picked up a point. We went back into the woods about half an hour ago, just under half an hour ago, and that was the last data point it sent. So definitely underperforms very poorly in the trees. The other two devices are somewhat better, but they do still lag behind, as you would expect, because there is a somewhat reasonable tree cover here as well. Okay, we're now back on the final stretch of this walk. We've now emerged from the woods, and it's more or less open ground all the way back to the end location. Tiny little bit of woods, but really for the next half a mile it's completely open sky. The spot tracker again hasn't sent an update for more than half an hour now, and it hadn't sent an update for an hour before that, so it is disappointing, but unfortunately it highlights the weakness of the spot trackers. Underneath tree cover, cruel as it is for me to say, you might as well have a couple of paper cups and some string, because the spot tracker really performs very poorly, and that's consistently the case. In open ground the device works very well, so let's not knock the spot tracker here, it's just the terrain. Don't use one under trees, it just comes down to that. The other two devices, which are satellite transmitting Iridiums, although they lag behind and consistently lag behind in the trees, they have transmitted sometimes. So, and that's just down to the 3 times more satellites that they are communicating with. So the question is, do you put your hand in your pocket and pay that extra bit of cash for the hire, or the purchase of an Iridium device? For me, the answer is absolutely yes. I would always go with, if I needed a satellite device, I would always go with an Iridium device, probably the inReach Mini 2. The Zoleo has performed okay. It has lagged behind. I don't think the receiver's quite as good on that as it is on the Mini 2, and it does have this still strange issue of it disabling the location sharing, which I'm in contact with the manufacturer about, and we're hoping to get a resolution to that. So that may be something which will go away, but overall the Zoleo's performed pretty well. The inReach has performed pretty well. Out in front by a country mile, quite literally, is the LTE tracker. So in this area, although it's patchy, mobile signal in some areas, the LTE has performed very well. I'll go through a deep and full analysis in just a second on the computer and show you how many data points they should have each sent and how many they actually sent, and show you the comparison and the recorded breadcrumb traces for each device as well. All it's been interesting route. This was going to be about 11 miles in total, so fairly representative of a reasonable day out, a bit longer for a D of E probably, and mixed terrain. So it is open, it is trees, a bit of a mixture of everything, so it's, I think, fairly representative of a typical D of E expedition, certainly in this part of the world anyway. Alright, let's go and look at those detailed stats. Okay, let's start our review. So just as a reminder, our four devices were the Zoleo numbered 4, which is the green one, the inReach Mini 2, which is numbered 3 and is the blue coloured one. We've got the Spot Tracker, which is orange, and the LTE, it was number 2, and the LTE, which is a purple colour, which is number 1. Now, I've got the ability to review each of these routes. So let me just start. Let me start with the Zoleo, for example, here, which is the top one. If I was to click on this device and then click on this line here, in black, it will show you its recorded trace and show you the time of each data point. So if I click on this now, you're going to see some information has appeared. And hopefully what you can see is the first data point we've got. We started at 20 past 11 and it sent the first data point there as 11:24. And as I begin to roll along this line, you will see that it will start to move along these data points. And let me give you an example here. You'll see the next time it sent one, for example, was 11:35, and then 11:38, and then 11:43, 11:50, 11:55, 12:02, and then we're going to drop out for a while and then 12:20. So there we what we're seeing is there is some dropout under the trees. What I was actually finding is the Zoleo device picked up around about this point here, 12:43, and then it continued reasonably well to around about there. It dropped off from live transmission at about this point here, picked up again around about there, and retransmitted later. Now, it may be that the Zoleo device has buffered some data and retransmitted it. I will check on the validity of that, but certainly it wasn't transmitting this data live. It was lagging behind and probably transmitting all of this data once it got to this point here, which I suspect is the case. But anyway, what you are seeing is largely speaking, the Zoleo has performed quite well. It has got a reasonable approximation. Okay, this black line has not exactly followed in some parts and some areas, and it's obviously missed out various bits here. We did take a slightly different route here, which I'll go into later, but it's reasonably faithful, so I'm quite happy with the performance of the Zoleo. And now, but let's have a look at the next device, which is the inReach Mini 2. And if I click on that one, you're going to see something similar. Now, the first thing we should say about the inReach Mini 2 is that it was on a slower update. It was only sending data once every 10 minutes. So it has overall sent fewer points because it was only supposed to send half as many. So what you will observe is that as I roll through, so the first point was sent at 11:28, and then 11:49. So we missed out one update in between there. It should have sent one at 11:38. From 11:50, we don't get another one until 12, around about 12:10. So again, it missed a data point out here. From 12:08, the next data point we got is at 12:29. So again, we missed another data point in between there, another two data points actually. Then it performed quite well over the top, and again it was fairly reasonable over there, missing a data point here, and again missing a couple of data points. So I'll show you a table in a minute, but it got about 70% of the data points. It actually skews the performance slightly. It makes the inReach look slightly poorer than it actually performed. That was purely because it's only sending data every 10 minutes. My experience of it is when it did transmit, that data was transmitted live at the point it was at, and therefore it was quite a reliable device. Let's have a look at the spot tracker next. And the spot tracker, if I click on this, right, so what you're going to see here is immediately you're seeing far fewer points. We should be seeing more than the Zoleo and twice as many as the inReach, but we're not. And if I scroll through here, so the first point it picked up was at 11:37, which was about 15 minutes after we started, and then 11:41. So initially it's working quite well. 11:43, 11:48, 11:54. 12:05, so we missed out about 10 minutes there. Then we got from 12:05 through to, where's the next data point? 12:40, so a 35-minute outage there. After that, it was quite reliable for the next few ticks, and we got a data point there at 12:58, And then we've got quite a large gap, 12:58. When do we get the next one? 12:58, 13:41, a 40-minute outage at that point in time. We got the next couple of data points. Then at 13:57, we've got another very big outage, 13:57 through to 41. Again, another 45-minute outage. So we've got two huge outages there for the tracker. That was a very long time for it to send data. And then ultimately, the last data point it sent was it actually we actually got I actually got back home about 3:15, and the last data it sent was at 14:56. So it didn't actually record any more data. I had to come and turn the tracker on once again. I turned it off and I turned it back on again to make it record this last data point, which is why it doesn't show anything till 14:34. So it stopped transmitting there when I actually reached the endpoint, which was just here. So the spot performance, as you can see, is very disappointing, based purely on there being quite a lot of tree cover on this. When we're in the open areas, which was here and around here, it performs very well. As soon as you step into tree cover, its performance is woeful, and really you should not be using a spot tracker anywhere near the trees. Finally, let's step onto the LTE device. And if I click on that there, what you're immediately going to see is a huge amount of adherence to the route. Now, it's important to say this device was sending every 30 seconds, so you're going to see a lot more adherence to the route. But what hopefully I will show you once we get over here is what this detail means over here. Now, as I scroll through, you'll see this is moving along very reliably. Every 30 seconds, it's sending a tick. Remember, the black line is the actual route. The purple is the pre-planned. You can see even here, I actually drew an error on here, and the tracker actually picked me up correctly and saying actually you went around that way. So it was very, very granular to the route. I zoom back out again. So every 30 seconds, this tracker transmitted. Now, this bit is interesting here. Let's zoom around here. So our tracking system will show you when data is buffered. That means the tracker between here and here, this area has no mobile signal, for about a quarter of a mile, something along those lines, as we walk down this road in this valley. And as a result, when we were in this section, this data was not transmitted live. So there are about 10 data points there, which is about five or 6 minutes worth of walking. Um, but as soon as we got to this point, all of that data was retransmitted back to our system. So we preserved that breadcrumb trail and it retransmitted it all. So whilst it wasn't able to transmit live there, that data was never lost. The satellite devices do not do that. They do lose that data. So then as we step through, you can see quite faithfully it showed the routes, even where I've deviated from the route. That one was actually accidental, but the next ones were deliberate. So I deliberately changed to a different route here, and I deliberately changed to a different route here, just to show you where the tracker was going to vary from a pre-planned route, and where you can see the LTE on how frequently it transmits and how accurate it is. You can really see where you went versus where a group goes. So LTE is very powerful in that regard. Now let's look at some statistics next. So this is interesting here. I've just very quickly put together a table. So we've got the four devices here. The reporting interval for the inReach Mini was 10 minutes, 30 seconds for the LTE, 5 minutes for the Spot, 6 minutes for the Zoleo. And I was walking for 3 hours and 44 minutes. And and what we expected is there should have been 22 data points sent by the Mini. We actually got 14, and as a result, the percentage success was 63%. I think that's slightly unkind because on a 10-minute update, when it does just miss one or two, that percentage drops quite severely. I think more representative, because it probably chopped a point off either end, is probably around about 70% of data was transmitted, which is not too bad, but not fabulous. LTE, sending every 30 seconds. We expected 448 data points. All 448 were received. 11 of them were not transmitted live, which, as I mentioned, is about 5 or 6 minutes. but 100% of data was transmitted. Spot tracker, 5 minute updates, 44 data points were expected in 3 hours and 44 minutes. It only sent 18, so just a 41% success rate. Pretty disappointing. Finally, the Zoleo, again, this has performed quite well. 6 minute intervals, expected 37 data points. It actually came out with 34, which is 92%. That's pretty good. My experience was it didn't always show that location immediately live. It tended to lag behind sending that data. So whilst it has sent it through, it didn't always show me where I was at the point I was viewing the data. So it's slightly flattering the Zoleo's performance, but nevertheless, it has overall achieved 92%, which is a good result for the Zoleo. So the conclusion thing we can come to is the LTE has performed the best. Now we are in an area that's got pretty decent mobile cover, so that we would expect. But what it does highlight is the real weakness of satellite transmitting devices when you step into trees and, as mentioned in the video, when you're near steep terrain as well. So very interesting to see those devices. What can you take home from it? LTE is your best bang for buck for most DAVs. If you're roaming into very remote areas where there's extensive areas of zero mobile cover, then you might want to think about hiring an inReach Mini 2 or using a Zoleo. The spot trackers work well when they are in open terrain, and that's it's as simple as that. I would not take one of these really near any kind of steep terrain or anywhere near any forests because the performance is just not there to support it. But in the right area, they work very, very well. I mentioned at the start of the video the way I mounted them was using the manufacturer's carabiners, and my recommendation is not to do that really for any of these devices, but these to some extent have got I've got a multi-directional aerial. The Spot really does not have a multi-directional aerial. It has to really be kept horizontal face up. It may have performed better, but I have mounted it the way that most people would pull one out the box from hire or from purchase and use it, just to illustrate further the weakness of the Spot device when it's not mounted correctly and when it's used in terrain where it's not suitable. So I hope you found that video very interesting, comparing the four most popular types of tracking device on the market. By all means, come back to us if you have any questions. Thank you.